Welcome to another event in Political Science Week 2008. This, of course, is the Distinguished Young Alumni Roundtable discussion on careers for political scientists. We are honored to have four truly distinguished, truly young alumni from our department. Let me introduce them to you one at a time. Dr. Ian Bremmer, to your far right. Dr. Bremmer, well, he was just Ian then, received his BA from Tulane in 1989, his PhD in political science from Stanford in 94, specializing in nation and state building in the former Soviet Union. Dr. Bremmer went on to the faculty of the Hoover Institution at Stanford, where at 25 he became the institution's youngest ever national fellow. He has held research and faculty positions at Columbia, the East-West Institute, Lawrence Livermore National Laboratory, and the World Policy Institute. He is the author of 6 books and counting, including Nations and Politics in the Soviet Successor States, with his former mentor at Tulane University, Dr. Ray Terrace, and the best-selling The J-Curve, a new way to understand why nations rise and fall. Dr. Bremmer has also published hundreds, literally, of articles and opinion pieces in such outlets as the Harvard Business Review, the New Republic, the Wall Street Journal, the LA Times, Fortune, and is a regular commentator on CNN, Fox News, and CNBC. But Dr. Bremmer is, at the heart of things, an entrepreneur, an intellectual entrepreneur, who, with $25,000 in hand, founded the research and consulting firm Eurasia Group in 1998. Today, Eurasia Group employs almost 100 full-time persons in New York and London and Washington, D.C., as well as hundreds of experts around the globe. Eurasia Group works with government leaders as well as opposition leaders throughout the world and consults for leading private companies such as Bear Stearns, Boeing, British Petroleum, ExxonMobil, Goldman Sachs, and the list goes on. So we're very pleased to have Dr. Bremmer with us. My introductions are so long that we should have pauses for applause in between. Christine Martin, at the other end of the table, graduated from Tulane in 1995 with a BA in political science, concentration in international relations, magna cum laude, and a BS in chemistry, cum laude. From 1995 to 2000, she was a foreign affairs specialist at the Department of Energy, working on issues of U.S. arms control and non-proliferation. In 2000, Christine joined the Department of State in their Bureau of International Security and Non-Proliferation. She has served as the Executive Secretary of the Subgroup on Nuclear Export Controls and has chaired the Nuclear Interdiction Action Group. Sounds like Jack Bauer may have been a member of that group, but Christine can tell us during Q&A. She's led delegations negotiating and implementing nuclear energy cooperation and non-proliferation agreements around the world, representing the United States government. She worked on developing and implementing a diplomatic strategy to investigate and shut down proliferation networks, including the Aku Khan procurement network from Pakistan. In 2003-04, Christine played a key role in the group that implemented the President's Proliferation Security Initiative. Thank you for joining us, Christine. Now we can, as the alumni become younger and the introductions become shorter, we can save the applause for our 2 next alumni until I'm finished with them both. Michael Sherman, next to Christine, is an attorney and real estate developer in New Orleans. After graduating Tulane in 2001, Mike became a mayoral fellow in city government, where he worked closely with government officials in the city. He moved to D.C. to attend Georgetown Law School, where he graduated. Before he graduated, he was elected by the citizens of the District of Columbia to his first elective position, Commissioner of the District of Columbia for the area around Capitol Hill. Mike joined the law firm Sullivan & Worcester after Georgetown, where his practice focused on legislative and regulatory affairs. Within days of Katrina, Mike returned to New Orleans to lead his firm's efforts in New Orleans as special counsel on rebuilding to the city council. After leaving the firm, Mike assumed the role of VP of Coastal States Development, a Florida-based real estate company. He was their leader of Louisiana and Mississippi operations. Mike is presently developing real estate projects in Mississippi and Louisiana and has just recently co-founded a law firm, Saper & Sherman, with the longtime city council president and former judge Eddie Saper. You also might know Mike as Professor Sherman, because he, of course, is an adjunct assistant professor of political science at Tulane, teaching Big Easy politics. Now, for Maura Carlin, I didn't get Maura's resume until somewhat late, so instead I pulled up a letter of recommendation. Maura is one of the brightest, most dedicated, and most mature students I have had the pleasure to teach at Tulane. Before Maura, I had never before agreed to supervise an independent study for a freshman. Independent studies require a good deal of student initiative and discipline, and such qualities typically require time to develop. Maura was ready from the day she matriculated. She went on to do her independent study on the topic of gun control. Now, I wanted Maura, as part of her research effort, to attend a gun show out in Kenner. I had no idea that she would go and work in the International Arms Bazaar of the Middle East. So Maura took my advice, I like to think, and just ran with it. Maura, when she graduated from Tulane, went to work in the think tank of AIPAC, the American Israel Public Affairs Committee, where she also, during which time she also entered graduate school at SAIS, the School of Advanced International Studies at Johns Hopkins University, where she earned her master's degree. When she earned her master's degree, just a few short years ago, she worked first as an intern and then as a full-time staffer in the Pentagon at the Office of the Secretary of Defense, where she's risen very rapidly in a short time to be first the Levant Director in the Office of the Deputy Assistant Secretary of Defense, and now is Special Assistant to the Undersecretary of Defense for Policy, his Mideast advisor. So please, once again, welcome our panelists. And to help get the conversation underway, we have Abby Kamen, who is the president of Pi Sigma Alpha at Tulane.
Great, thanks.
Abby, it's all yours.
Thanks. Again, thank y'all for being here. Let's start with this. If y'all could just please begin sharing, your experience at Tulane and then what led you to do what you do today. That'd be great. Dr. Bremmer.
I mean, I have to start first. I think that was the longest introduction. Gives me the short straw. Look, I'm delighted to be here. It's nice to address students at Tulane. We just had a great lunch with a few of you, and I remembered, brought me right back to a lot of the cramming sessions for midterms that I had my senior year at Tulane. I also am delighted to be introduced by a fellow president of Pi Sigma Alpha. I was president of Pi Sigma Alpha in 1988, 1989. Ray Terrace was the faculty advisor, and my candidacy had to happen while I was a junior, and I was in England at the time. So I remember the letter I got from Ray congratulating me, saying that my candidacy was accepted by acclamation, which struck me as somewhat authoritarian, but I was very pleased because I got to be president. look, I had an unusual undergraduate in the sense that I was 15 years old when I started. I was pushed ahead a few times. I lied about my age so that girls would go out with me. I had never been away from, sort of Boston area where I grew up, and suddenly showing up in New Orleans is daunting and exciting all at once. I started as an engineer because my chemistry teacher in high school, Mr. Champion, told me that I had some form of natural acumen in that field, and that I should become a chemical engineer. I started off as a chemical engineer, and I hated it. There was a lot of memorization of formulas going on with chemistry and physics and math and the rest, and I liked reading The Economist and playing Risk. Political science struck me as a more natural way to do that. So after a semester, I quit engineering and I started taking poli-sci without telling my family. When they eventually saw my transcript about a year later, and they said, well, your grades are fine, but you don't appear to be taking many engineering courses. Don't you need to do that to become an engineer? I was like, well, actually, I'd meant to tell you I'm not doing engineering anymore. I would say that, first of all, the ability to be flexible was very important. The ability to not be so far down the track in engineering and to have faculty advisors that were sufficiently supportive that they recognized that there were other things you can do in life and that you don't make decisions that are unchangeable when you're a freshman in college is important. Secondly, the extraordinary international programs that Tulane University has today and had when I was an undergraduate. I took advantage of them to a great degree. Went to the former Soviet Union twice. First time I'd ever left the United States, 1986. Was on a trip with Ray Terrace and a bunch of undergraduates to go to what was then the beginning of the Gorbachev era in the former Soviet Union. What an exciting thing to do. How could you not become excited about international affairs when you have an opportunity like that? Did another trip to Central Asia and the Caucasus. Did a trip to Japan with a Tulane Honors Program that I spent almost a semester there. And then did a year in England, and did get some Mardi Gras in between. So that was one thing that when I think about my undergraduate experience, that the international exposure and the ability to really understand the world was incredibly valuable. I didn't obviously write a speech for any of this. I have the same questions that were just posed in terms of a couple of minutes of how I got from where I was to where I am today. A lot of it's random. At the end of the day, you finish college, very few people have plotted out exactly what they want to do for the rest of their lives, even the next few years. And I applied for everything. I applied for jobs, and I applied some of those jobs. Remember Ernst & Julio Gallo Winery that needed a marketing assistant, but I found out that also meant that you had to actually pack and unpack crates that sounded like stressful physical labor, and I was even smaller then than I am today. And I think I looked askance when he mentioned that, and that was the end of that interview process. I went through probably 15 job interviews, and I didn't get I think I got one second interview with Macy's as a junior executive, and the sock selling did not strike me as exciting. But I didn't get a third interview, so wasn't going to get a job, and I thought getting a job was a nice idea after college, and applied for graduate schools. And after going through that process, law school and PhD, I got into Stanford for a PhD program. I was going to still be a political scientist, and that was that. So that was pretty random. What wasn't random is the fact that I loved political science, and I thought that the focus of looking at how politics affect the world was something that was not only interesting intellectually, but was also increasingly relevant to real life, relevant to businesses, relevant to the international economy, relevant for lots of reasons. I mean, in part because of the way the world is shifting away from the U.S. as a unipolar power, relevant because of where we get energy from in the world, increasingly unstable parts, relevant because of the growth of China, relevant because of the emergence of rogue organizations and states. I mean, all of these things mean that we need to understand political developments if we want to understand how the global economy works. And you can do that as an academic, you can do that in the State Department, but what I found that you could not do when I finished my PhD was you could not apply that to the private sector. that applying for jobs and wanting to be a political scientist, I still found people in Wall Street and in the major corporations said, well, you sound very interesting, but we don't hire political scientists. So after a year of that, I decided to hang out my own shingle and develop a company of political scientists. And that's what we've done, is basically try to help companies around the world understanding how politics affect the global markets. At the beginning, when I set up the firm in 1998, I had to explain frequently what it was that we did and why it was relevant. After September 11th, 2001, I didn't have to do that as much anymore. After oil prices hit 70 and 80 and 90 and $100, I didn't have to do that so much anymore. After China has now been growing 10% a year for 30 straight years, I didn't have to do that so much anymore. So I think that, frankly, this is poli-sci week. It's clear we've always had a very popular major. People fundamentally are interested in and like the things that we study. But increasingly, the world is moving to us. And poli-sci is becoming much more relevant to all of the jobs and all of the sectors that are out there. I'm delighted to be able to be a part of that and still call myself a political scientist, both as a hobby but also as an avocation. And I expect that increasingly numbers of you will be able to do that as well.
Great. Well, thank you very much for that kind introduction. I must say I've never had an intro like that, and I will remember it for quite a while. It is a real pleasure to be here. When Tom, my very first political science professor, mentioned this, I was very enthusiastic, and I'm excited to be here. It's been a pleasure to talk to those students that I have so far, and I must say I think all of us up here are probably a little envious that you all are right now in that very undetermined stage of there are so many options. How do you choose? One thing you'll probably see, and Ian touched on it, is the randomness of our paths. When I came to Tulane, I was always going to study political science. Then I was going to law school. Then I was going to be a politician. And my path was exactly set out. But reality doesn't necessarily work that way. You start to learn that there are other things you might like more than others. What happened to me is I went abroad my junior year, and I was living in the Middle East during the height of the peace process. And then I came home, and suddenly everything had blown up. And I couldn't understand why. And it was emotionally upsetting. Academically, I didn't understand why. I was busy memorizing the Oslo Accords, and suddenly there was absolutely no talks. There were just bombs going off. So I thought maybe law school had to wait just a little bit. And so I came to Washington to work in the think tank of this lobbying group. And that's where I developed a pretty good expertise in Middle East issues. And I learned how Washington works, which is that there are those in government who oftentimes don't have enough time to read everything that they want. And so a lot of times they'll turn to outside sources. NGOs, lobbyists, you name it, who've distilled everything into 2 pages with a lot of white space and explained to them what's really going on so they can go make their decisions. So I spent some time doing that, and one of my bosses said, if you're going to do this foreign policy world, you need to go get your master's. So I went and got my master's, and while I was there, I tried to figure out what do I want to do in government, if this is the interesting thing. I looked at the intelligence community, I looked at the policy world, and the latter was pretty appealing, particularly the Pentagon. This was, the U.S. had just entered Iraq. This was the Pentagon that was very influential, at least according to the papers, so I thought that's where I should try to go. So I went and did an internship. You'll probably hear from all of us that those unpaid internships, even the paid ones, can actually be worth something someday as you're making copies because they might offer you a job. And luckily it worked out well for me that it did. So the part of the Pentagon that I've been working on for the last few years is what's known as the Office of the Secretary of Defense. The way the Defense Department is set up is in the U.S. we have civilian control of the military. And this is encapsulated in an office known as OSD, Office of the Secretary of Defense. Within it is the policy section. This is kind of like the State Department for the whole Defense Department. And it's a group of people, there's about 1,000 of us, and we advise the Secretary of Defense on issues involving different regions, involving different functions, you name it. So for about 2 years, I was one of the Middle East advisors, and my area of focus was Syria, Lebanon, and Israel-Palestinian issues. So my job was to recommend to the Undersecretary of Defense and the Secretary of Defense what our policy should be. So when Israel and Hezbollah fought a war 2 summers ago, my job was to work on getting 15,000 Americans out, and it was also to say, hey, should we help Israel now or should we not? What should we do with the Lebanese? what kind of relationship should we have? You know, I was mentioning some of the students at lunch, one of the intimidating parts of the policy world is at the end of the day you have to make a recommendation. And you're often choosing between not such good options. But that's your job. You are supposed to be the expert, and you have to say to your boss, this is what you need to do. There's something incredible about that you can be young and smart and articulate, and you can be pushing for the U.S. to change its relationship with the country, and maybe that will happen. That's unbelievable. It's also a lot of pressure because you might be wrong. And when you're wrong, there can be some serious ramifications there. So I've really enjoyed being there. For the last 8 months or so, I've worked for the Undersecretary of Defense. He's the Secretary's top policy advisor on all issues involving foreign policy. So, you know, a typical day is kind of hard to describe, but I can tell you last Wednesday, Thursday was pretty tough because our embassy in Belgrade was being overrun. The Turks were invading Iraq, and the Pentagon was working on shooting down a satellite. So those are just some of the issues that came across our desk over a period of few hours. You can imagine the connections between those are somewhat hazy, and one can only get a certain depth of knowledge on each of those. So it's interesting, it's fast-paced. You know, I made sort of a list of the very superficial, what are the pros and cons. The cons are you work a whole lot of hours. My average day is about 13 to 14 hours, and you don't make much money at all. The pros are that you're advising the senior leadership of the U.S. government on issues, which are pretty incredible. You have some neat perks. I met kings, prime ministers, ministers of defense, heads of militaries. You know, I've flown in jets around the world, been part of delegations, negotiations. It's a really neat experience. So I think that's a quick overview. The one thing I guess I'd try to leave you with in the intro is, you know, we each have our own paths. It's all serendipity. And I don't know that any of us can really look 3 years ahead and have a good idea of where we'll be. So you just need to make sure that you're enjoying whatever it is you can be doing at that moment.
I like that. I'm going to pick up where you left off. This theme of randomness is certainly something that applies to me as well. Dr. Bremmer and I, we have a different problem. You lied about your age. I tell the truth about my age, but no one believes me. I'm 29, a very youthful look. That's something that's followed me around for a number of years. And when I came to Tulane as a freshman, I was an emergency medical technician, and I was coming to Tulane to be a doctor. And Tulane had TEMS. Are there any TEMS members in the audience? Okay, well, there's none. But I was coming here because TEMS was here, and I could be a student EMT. That lasted for about 3 weeks until I decided that's not what I wanted to do. And I want to emphasize one of the points that Maura made about taking advantage of opportunities, because that's what I did while I was at Tulane. The political science department gave me so many important opportunities, and I'm forever grateful to Chair Langston for the opportunities he has given me. I'll just point out a few of them to you. When I was a student, I was able to assist Professor Langston in one of the books he was writing. And then when the book did well and the publisher wanted to do a second book, he asked me to be an assistant co-author, so I took advantage of that opportunity. When Professor Langston became the Presidency Research Group editor of the report that this Presidency Research Group puts out, he asked me to help him out and be his managing editor, so I took advantage of that opportunity. I am also, like Dr. Bremmer, a former Pi Sigma Alpha president, and I earned my position through dictatorial appointment. Can anyone guess who appointed me? Professor Langston. The organization had become defunct, and we got it going again, but the political science department has played such an important role in my life. When I graduated Tulane, I applied to law schools. I had this interest in politics. I had began working and interning in city government in New Orleans, but I didn't know why I wanted to go to law school. So I stopped. I deferred my admission to Georgetown for a year, and I wanted to figure out, why am I going to law school? What do I intend to get out of law school? Where do I want to be after law school? And what an incredible 15-month period. I got to work with Mayor Morial as a Morial fellow, the city council president, Eddie Saber, who's now my law partner. And I got to focus on very local issues. So while you guys are making sure we have a country that's safe, I'm making sure there's not a pothole on the street when you drive across it. I was not successful in that endeavor. And that was never my responsibility. But when I was in law school, I went to a community meeting, and to ask a question about a park around the corner, I had a simple solution. When I suggested that solution, the commissioner for my portion of D.C. for the Advisory Neighborhood Commission, insulted me and told me I was a little kid, I didn't know what I was talking about, so I decided to run against him. I thought it would be a fun exercise. I didn't expect to be successful, and the way the election turned out, we were doing great, and he pulled out of the race, and I had a wonderful 2 years as an Advisory Neighborhood Commissioner in D.C. to further my interest and really love of local government as the solution to a lot of problems that affect people on a daily basis. After law school, I went to a large law firm in D.C., Sullivan and Worcester, and I liked everything about it, but I just knew it wasn't for me. And after Katrina, we had the opportunity to come down to New Orleans and were hired as a special counsel to the city council. I was the lead attorney in New Orleans for our firm, and we had an unbelievable 1 year. And maybe I'll share some stories later on, but I kind of want to talk about my career path a little bit more right now. I decided to leave the law firm because I wanted to explore some of the entrepreneurial side of my personality, and that's when the opportunity came with Coastal States Development to work on their projects in Louisiana and Mississippi, developing subdivisions, office space. We've done 1.5 million square feet of commercial space since Katrina. So we're going back into damaged communities and actually rebuilding them, which is an incredible thing to sit down with members of the community using all this knowledge of working with local governments and finding out what their needs are and then developing a project that they like. One of the things I do right now, which I love more than anything, is teach at Tulane. I'm an adjunct assistant professor. It's one of the things I love doing. I see a lot of Big Easy politics students in here. Raise your hands if you're some Big Easy. That's a great showing. So thank you for coming. And
did you offer them extra credit if they came?
I did not. No, I did not. But it was. I've had a very random career path, but I took advantage of a lot of opportunities, and I've created a pretty diverse resume. And I love what I do, and I interact with local government on a daily basis, and I guess we'll talk a little bit more about that later on. But that's how Tulane played an important role in my life in terms of giving me these experiences and giving me these opportunities that I took advantage of. And that's what I encourage you to do, is take advantage of all the opportunities right now. Maura said how jealous we are, and I am as well, because when you're in college, you get to choose what you want to do. I worked with Geraldo Rivera for a couple of years during college because I thought I might be interested in media. I decided not to pursue that, but why don't you take advantage of all the opportunities in front of you, and you'll be sitting up here in 7 or 8 years as well.
Hi. Thank you for having us here. It's a treat to come back to Tulane and to speak to you and give you some thoughts that we have on how we developed our careers and what the good points of our careers are and what the bad points are. My years at Tulane remain some of my favorite memories. They certainly inspired me, and they changed me from where I was before I entered Tulane, and they created the set of dreams and ambitions that I carried with me when I went up to Washington. I'm going to, again, echo a theme. Serendipity does play a big role in anybody's life in picking and creating opportunities, but you're the one that makes the choices about which opportunities you take up and which paths you go. Unlike my colleagues, I had a little bit more of the less random and more planned sense to what I wanted to do and why I ended up where I ended up. When I was in high school, my parents ended up in the small town of Fort Walton Beach, Florida. Having moved from Boston to Montgomery to Tennessee to Maryland, we finally ended up in Florida. And I spent my high school years in one place, in one high school, which was amazing. And my sister did not, unfortunately, have that opportunity. Fort Walton Beach is the home of Eglin Air Force Base. It's the largest Air Force base in the free world, or was. You could tell me, Maura, if that's still the case. On that base is the Armament Directorate, which is the division of the Wright Laboratories that actually makes some of the munitions for the U.S. military. The base takes on students as interns once in a while, about for a year maybe. I was one of those interns they took. It's kind of started me down a math and science path that I really resisted. I did not want to go that way. But it was paid, and it was paid a little bit more than working at Farmore, one of the local stores, including the computer store Babbage's, which is where I had my original job. So I took it. And I went and I worked on missile guidance systems for a year and a half. And after doing that, I started to apply for college. And at the end of the second summer, which had been the summer between my senior year of high school and my first year at Tulane, the director of the base got to hear us all make presentations about what we had done on our summer vacation. And the person introducing me at the time said, "This is Christine Riando. She is our one failure. She refuses to go get an engineering degree," which was the whole point of the program. Go get an engineering degree because you can do great things with it. She refuses. She's going to Tulane, and she's going to do international relations. And I made my little presentation, and I went off to Tulane to do international relations. And I was going to do that, and then I think I was probably going to go to law school. I wasn't sure then what I exactly wanted to do, but I wanted to end up in Washington in politics, doing international politics. I really, really wanted to end up at the State Department. Thought maybe Foreign Service, that type of thing. When I got to Washington, one of the things I found out is I love the United States, and we have incredible opportunities here and incredible people here, and I don't really want to leave them and go and live in foreign countries. I want to live here and have a American life. So the Foreign Service was not the path that I was going to take to do that, because you're not going to live in America if you're in the Foreign Service. You're going to live abroad. So I wasn't sure what to do on that path. The years at Tulane, I graduated with 2 degrees. I did a chemistry degree just to keep myself employed at Tulane, and pretty much the whole 4 years of chemistry is a blur of nomenclature and algebraic equations and quite a few math classes. And it was fun, and I enjoyed it, and I liked the science. I really liked the science, but my main interest was science and policy. There's a lot of areas of science where policy makes the difference between what happens and what doesn't happen in the world. The policymakers make the difference, I should say. And I'll tell you a couple of the classes that really drove that point home. One was my national security class taught by a professor who's no longer here. Another one was Dr. Langston's class on science and technology and public policy. I do remember that class. We spent an awful lot of time on HD TV. Don't know why. And my particular paper in that class had to do with pharmaceuticals, which isn't relevant to my job at all. It was in the national security class that I first heard about the idea of arms control and nonproliferation, other than the big theory. I mean, I actually heard about the working international institutions that do arms control and nonproliferation. And I said, I really want to get involved and be part of those institutions. That's what I want to do. I learned about the Nuclear Suppliers Group, and I learned about the Wassenaar Arrangement and the International Atomic Energy Agency. I said, I want those experiences. I want to be sitting there at the meetings, listening to them debate the UN resolutions and that sort of thing. So I really wanted to go to the State Department, but it was a different area that I wanted to be in. The serendipity part comes out in that my senior year, I took a road trip with some friends to Atlanta and went to a job fair. And luckily enough, the Department of Energy had a booth at the job share. And they were hiring for an internship program. Again, internship programs are a wonderful thing. This one happened to be paid, which was great. You really can't find too many paid internships. I applied for it, and then they brought me to Washington to sit in a room like this with 3 people, in a big room anyway, 3 people and me. And the 3 people faced me and they said, well, what are you interested in? And I said, well, I like arms control and nonproliferation issues. I would like to work in that area. And they're like, that's great. You know we do that here at the Department of Energy. So I said, of course, I know you do that here. I had no idea. I didn't know. I really didn't know much. I know they had in their little chart, as you walk into the Department of Energy, it had this thing called nuclear stockpile stewardship. I didn't really know what that was. I had never taken a class in U.S. government politics, probably very ignorant, and somehow I managed to hide it because they hired me. And they put me in this program for 3 months where I got to learn all about environmental management and how to clean up nuclear sites that are no longer being used to make nuclear weapons. And at the end of 3 months, they said, now what do you want to do? And I said, again, I want to do nuclear nonproliferation, nuclear disarmament, arms control. In fact, I'm interested in this arcane area of export controls, where you're balancing on a daily basis the decision of, can a company export this item, do this line of work, hire this person, against the, is this going to help a country that we don't want to have nuclear weapons get them? Is this going to let the technology out of the bag? Is this going to contravene current U.S. policy in any way? And they said, there's somebody you should meet. And they took me down the hall to meet with this woman who does that. That was her role. She was the office director for the office that worked with the Nuclear Suppliers Group and the International Atomic Energy Agency. She was in the bureau that did safeguards, nuclear safeguards. And she hired me out of the program. Well, she hired me into her office for a 6-month internship. She immediately sent me to Belarus and Kazakhstan. And she said, you have 3 weeks, and then you're going to Belarus and Kazakhstan. And you're going to train the Belarusians and the Kazakhstanis how to do export licensing. I said, thank you. She said, I believe in sink or swim. I said, clearly. But I went to Belarus and I went to Kazakhstan. Those were my first 2 trips. Actually, it was Kazakhstan and Belarus, and I was the first person in the office in that bureau at the Department of Energy to go to Kazakhstan. And thankfully, I went with a team of about 6 people, so it wasn't just me. There was a blizzard when I was in Kazakhstan. It was October. I didn't even have my winter coat with me. I had just come from Tulane and Florida. I didn't own a winter coat like that I needed. I got a cold. I shut my hand in the car door. I got taken to the emergency room at the embassy. I got stuck in an elevator. Everything that could go wrong went wrong in Kazakhstan. So we went on to Belarus, and I remember sitting in Dr. Taras's office and talking to him about these countries and going to his class on these countries, and it was so surreal to me at the time I was studying about these countries, what they were like. And then to go there, I felt like I had justified my political science major right then, just to be in a country that I had studied about. And I got there, and one of the guys at the embassy who worked at the on-site inspection agency for the Department of Defense took me around to all the different museums in Belarus in that city, and we went to one museum had a piano, and I played the piano, and she actually gave me a piece of art to take home, which was my first souvenir from my travels. I was very excited to work at the Department of Energy, and I spent 6 years there, and I did some incredible things that I'm very proud that I did, and I'm very happy that I had those experiences. I loved going to the IAEA meetings and the Nuclear Suppliers Group meetings, and I did what I wanted to do, or what I had said I wanted to do when I was sitting in the national security class at Tulane. And it was only because of the junior year abroad program where I got to go to London and work at the Verification Information Technology Center, VERTIC, as an NGO, and because of the things you guys taught me about how the world works, that I was able to get those opportunities and use them. So I'm very grateful that you challenged me to do that sort of stuff. After 6 years at the Department of Energy, we changed office directors. And the new office director who came in was from the NSC. And you could tell he wasn't used to being an office director. It was a little low for him. He was not interested in the day-to-day. He wanted to do the big stuff, and he wanted to be talking to Leon Firth all the time. And I was fine with that because I got to go to the meetings where they were deciding DPRK policy for the first time. And I was like, wow, this is what you really, when you're a civil servant in the government, this is what your job is to go to these meetings and make these decisions, as you were talking about a little earlier. And then the State Department came up with a job opening, and they came up to me and they said, we have a job vacancy. And I said, oh, I have a friend, and I was thinking of a friend from my Tulane days. I have a friend who'd be interested in that. And they said, okay, we'll hire you. And I was like, oh, you want me? You want me in the State Department? In my area of work, the State Department is regarded very highly as a very professional agency to work for. It is. It's incredible staff of people who know so much about how things came to be the way they are. Most of the people in my office, when I started, I was 27. The average age of my office was 62. It's now down to, with me, it went down to 58. So, no, sorry, 52 to 48. So now it's about 62, because it's been about 7 years since, and we've gotten a few more people. There are about 14 of us that do all the nuclear nonproliferation issues for the Bureau of International Security and Nonproliferation. And right now I am working on South Korea, South Africa, Brazil, Argentina, and a number of other countries and places where we have ongoing nuclear energy cooperation and nuclear nonproliferation cooperation, and I am promoting those relationships under the Global Nuclear Energy Partnership. And you heard from Dr. Langston some of the other things that I have done. So I do want to encourage you in thinking about the federal government as a place where you can do a lot of interesting things, where you can travel widely and have a lot of fun, and work with some pretty terrific people.
Great, thank you very much. Y'all all have such interesting and amazing stories. We're going to open it up for questions and discussions, and just feel free to come up to the mic or raise your hand. I'll get things going. Can y'all talk a little bit more about the transition after Tulane, and also one thing that you learned about life the hard way after college that you wish someone had told you in college?
I suppose I wish someone had told me how to run a company. No, I'm serious. You know, I mean, look, if there's one thing I want, if there's one piece of advice I can impart on anyone who's an undergraduate, it is take risks early, right? Because once you're married, once you have kids, once you've already gotten yourself to a standard of living, a standard of comfort, things are harder to give up it as you feel like you have more to lose and you become more stable. Inertia takes over. When you've just finished your college degree, you can try anything, so you should. And I felt that way when I started my company to a degree. I mean, it was just me. I didn't have any outside investors. So if it took me 3 years to get it moving, it was fine. And if the first idea for the company didn't work, the second one did, that was fine. I mean, you know, when you're not far to fall, you can't screw up that much, and you can bounce back up a lot. It's like watching 2-year-olds go down ski slopes, right? I mean, they abuse their bodies extraordinarily. They bounce right back up. It's not an issue. That's what you want to do. But I had no idea how to run a company, and that I'll give you just a couple of quick anecdotes as to things I would have liked to have known. You know, for example, I would have liked to have known that a program existed that when you want to send research or invitations or mail to a group of 500 people, that it will automate it as opposed to you sitting at the fax machine until 4 o'clock in the morning sending it out yourself. I would have liked to have known that. When I found out it existed, I cried. I actually cried. I would have liked to have someone tell me that I needed QuickBooks or at least Microsoft Excel and an understanding of what to do with that to run the accounting of my company for the first 2 years, as opposed to in Microsoft Word with a calculator. I would have liked to have known that. That would have been useful. I would have liked to have known how to file my taxes effectively so that I didn't pay late fees and screw things up the first couple of years. I mean, there are lots of things. I mean, you know, you learn by trial and error, and I mean, I know that there are people out there that have this experience. The reality is that when you don't, you make it up, and you make mistakes. The good thing, of course, with making those mistakes is you then know every part of what you're creating, and you can explain it to other people. But a little bit of background in that. If I had I knew I wanted to be a political scientist increasingly, but I didn't know that I was going to be an entrepreneur. And I still don't think of myself as an entrepreneur, but that has downside. So, I mean, to the extent what I would say is it would have behooved me earlier on to find people, once I knew I was starting a business, to find someone that knew something about a business, as opposed to just a bunch of smart political scientists and getting some advice from them as well. That would have been smart.
Thanks. You know, actually, I think I follow that a little bit. I wish I had known that people want to help you. On the whole, if you're smart, you're a good person, you're well-read, articulate, good writer. Those people you meet who say, hey, drop me an email, they really mean it. And they actually do want to help you out. And these are connections that can go so very far. Maybe not that first job, but in some way it'll get manifested. It's still something I can be hesitant about. You know, you meet these important people and it's drop me an email, let's stay in touch, let's get lunch. Generally, I find they want to, and it's worth it. And so also when people who are a little older than you say that, you should take them up on it. And another thing that's maybe a little uncomfortable is that I wish I had known how complex things can be. I say this because my first boss in Washington was indicted. And that was a really difficult experience for me to go through because I had more of the butterflies, you know, and rabbits vision of Washington. Everyone gets along well, smart people all wanting to work together and do good. And that's not necessarily how it always is. So I'm not saying you need to be suspicious. You need to be very aware. And I'm from the Midwest. We're nice. We're naive. And I found that I've lost that a little bit, which is perhaps a good thing. But it's, I guess being aware is important. And of course, though, I caveat that with my first statement is that, on the whole, people really do want to work with you and want to help you and develop these good relationships.
I think I can one-up you. Your boss was indicted. I've worked in New Orleans city government. About 20 folks I've worked with have been indicted. So, no, I'm just joshing. No, actually, I'm not. But the rule that I wish I knew is that failure is okay. Because my goal when I left law school and joined the law firm was you get a phenomenal salary. Numbers I couldn't have even imagined a few years earlier in terms of salary. And you're part of a large organization, and there's security. You know you can do your job good. You do what you know you can do. And it's a wonderful, stable life. 7 years, you can make partner. And then once you make partner, you can become a senior partner. So it's a very stable, it's a stable path. And I threw all that away and entered the world of real estate development. And truly, if any of the deals I worked on didn't work out, I probably would have had to accept failure and go back to a law firm, but that didn't happen. And failure is okay. We went after 100 deals before we found one that worked. But that one deal is now a $75 million deal under construction on the West Bank. So we went after 100, only one worked. That's not too bad. So right now I'm going after 500. Let's see if we can get the next 5. So we're just trying, and this point about me being 29, single with a dog, there's not much that can go wrong in my life right now in terms of taking a risk. There's not much I can lose. So I'm giving it all right now when I have this flexibility without a family to support, and it's a great time to take risks. So
I'm trying to think of if there's one thing that I learned in the adult world that I didn't know in college that I wish I'd known going into the adult world, it'd probably be something along the lines of it doesn't matter what you make in life, how much money you make. It matters whether you enjoy what you're doing. More than anything, it matters whether you enjoy what you're doing and you enjoy where you're living and how you're living. Because so much of life is dealing with bills and dealing with the mundane, whenever I went on travel, for example, for the first year, I traveled at least twice a month, and it was wonderful to go on travel, but I had to remember, because this was before the days of electronic banking, that I still had bills to pay on the 15th. And if I wasn't going to be there for 2 weeks, I needed to pay them before I left. And how on earth was I going to pay them before I left on a $24,000 a year salary living in Washington? That type of stuff really gets in the way of, did I enjoy what I was doing the first 5 years I was doing it? But I did enjoy what I was doing, and it means so much more to me looking back that I did what I wanted to do, and I kept going at the job, and I didn't just cave in and go home and start over or look at doing something else. Things have equalized, obviously, with pay as you go through the ranks. That will happen, but even now I tell my husband when we're looking at big major changes in our life, let's go in the direction where we're going to be happy, not in the direction where we're going to make the most money. because it's very, very important to enjoy your job. You're going to spend so much time working. It is so important to be proud of what you do and to enjoy what you do.
Does anyone else have any questions?
Microphone?
Yeah, please.
I'm Professor Ray Tapas in the Department of Political Science. You strike us as being pretty intense when you're on the job. So my question is, how do you goof off? What is it that allows you to be intense at work, that allows you to kind of chill when you're not at work? How did you goof off, please be candid, while you were at Tulane? And how is your goofing off time changed since you've become professionals?
You clearly want that. Go ahead, Maura, you laugh.
No, I don't think I have great stories, to be honest. How's it changed? Well, I work a lot now, so I have to sleep at least a little bit. So I'm definitely not nearly as fun as I might have been 10 years ago. I think it's actually kind of funny. On a very regular basis, I know a lot of folks, and I have this problem, will say, God, we really need to get hobbies. People have hobbies. And it's not just that we like to work, or we like to read, or hang out with friends, things like that. But I don't play guitar. I'm not an artist. I don't know that I have a real hobby besides kind of being obsessed with the Middle East. And I like food writing as a genre. But I have no good answer to this question, which is why I'm laughing a little. Because I really think that one needs to have hobbies. So this is more, yes, I failed on this one.
I think I have context for this. Ray, you're a bad person for asking it, but that's okay. He knows he is. So, look, I mean, when I was a kid, anyone that grows up as a prodigy, right, has lots of hobbies, and many of them are forced. Right, so I had many things that I did outside of my studies. I played jazz piano, and I sort of did debate, and I was on the chess club. And but are those the ways you have fun, or is that just part of the life of being a prodigy? You just expanded your job to include your entire life. You're on display, and that's what you do. Okay, so then I went to Tulane, and then I just drank all the time, right? And it's a reality. And the drinking age was 18, and the French Quarter's right there, and the Boot's not very far, and the Rat had some ambiance back then. And I took advantage of all of those things. I'm sorry about that. The University Center's great now, but the Rat, do something about the Rat. Just get it back, right, so that you can actually have a beer or 7 there. Once you're 21. And I suffered my first term with the 1.9 GPA, and they put me on probation as a consequence, and all of that. Look, my context, and then after you get that out of your system, then you can start to figure out what it is you enjoy. So, for example, I've always loved stand-up. I love speaking. I like speaking to audiences. It turned out I love stand-up comedy. And when I went to New York, I wrote some stuff and I did some performances, and I loved it. I absolutely adored it. And I got much more into sport. And when you're 11 in high school, you're too small to play a lot of sport. But so when you're 30, you're just as out of shape as everybody else. So you started to row and play racquetball. But two things that are important, because I am an intense guy. Right? In fact, I once said, I remember this is a very funny story. About 5 years ago, I was talking to a friend of mine. This is just when all this eHarmony and Match.com and everything was going on. And they was like, would you ever do that? I said, no, I would never do that. But if I did, I know what I would write about myself. I would say intense, intelligent, and insufferable. Those 3 things. And I said, with that description, anyone that decided to write me would probably get my personality and probably like me, sort of. Or if not, would have their own problems, and we'd figure it out. I don't know why I'm telling you all this, but it's the YouTube stuff. Tom will delete it before it goes out. But once you figure out what you really want to do, and you do work a lot, and when I'm on, right? I mean, I get to work 7:30 in the morning, and I finish up 5:36. I'm on a reception afterwards. I am on. I am not goofing off at work. I am working when I'm at work, because I love what I do. And I created the damn firm. Of course I love what I do. But it is real important to take time off. It is real important not to bring your work home with you on the weekends. It is real important that when you hang out with your buddies and do things that you really enjoy, no matter how hard you want to succeed. My 29-year-old buddy over here with the dog, he comes across as extraordinarily nice and well-balanced, but I hope he takes off enough time. I will tell you that, as I was starting my firm, I didn't get enough vacation. This year I'm taking off August. I'm taking the month off. I'm probably going to get a house on Nantucket. I'm looking at places now. I'm taking the month off. I'm going to work out every day. I'm going to write some more comedy. I haven't decided what else I'm going to do, but I'm taking off a month. You have to do that. The French understand this, right? They're not very productive, but they understand it. The Brits understand this. We in the United States have become harder working than the Japanese. That's wrong, right? We have dual incomes, no kids, who are working harder than we ever did before for stuff we can't enjoy, that's ruining the environment and everything else. I don't need to get on a rant, but the point is the quality of our lives have not increased by the fact that we're making more money and we're working harder. We must recognize that, and especially for your young, distinguished alums, distinguished young alums, whatever we are, we're young and distinguished and alums, that we have to be role models, not just in how many great things we accomplish. We've got to be role models in being kind of cool and being kind of approachable and being kind of normal, right? So that you would actually want to have the kind of lives that we do. Because if you don't, then we're not really serving any purpose for you guys, right? And Tulane, anyone who graduates from Tulane should get this. That's all I can say.
I teach some of these students, so I'm not going to answer this question. No, that is so important. And for anyone, how many folks here are considering law school, by a show of hands? So a pretty significant number. The traditional path for a lot of folks after law school is law firms. And we have a little email list of all my close friends from law school. And what's the record? Longest worked without leaving the office, number of days without taking a day off. It stands at 390 right now, the XM-Sirius satellite merger. Our friend hasn't taken a single day off in over a year. That's just not healthy. And
that includes Saturday and Sunday.
That includes Saturday and Sunday. A lot of it, they have pull-out couches in their offices so they can get a quick nap without leaving the office. These firms that are paying you the big dollars, they expect that type of commitment, some of them. So you've got to look at the culture of the firm. So I've made a concerted effort, especially coming back to New Orleans. That's not the culture of this city. You all know that, to make sure I have plenty of time to enjoy life. I will say this. When I was in D.C., I'm a drummer. I've been drumming since I was little, and I had a band. And we'd play in a little Georgetown college bar. So with all the grad students from law school and the undergrads would go there. And our band would play out every few weeks, and it was a great time. Well, when I was a commissioner and folks had a matter coming before the commission, and they wanted to suck up to Commissioner Sherman, you'd see about 3 or 4 real estate developers at the Georgetown College Bar at 1 a.m. on a Saturday night. And, oh, Mike, you happen to be here drumming in the band tonight, is that right? But it was a good way of sucking up, and I would make sure they sang Living on a Prayer on the microphone to close out the night. So.
It's reminding me of some things. One of the things you're forced to do when you go travel abroad is tour countries. You're actually forced in many cases to go to cultural events and admire things about foreign countries when you go to their countries. I have been to 4 operas in 4 different countries, and they were all La Traviata. I have fallen asleep at La Traviata in 3 different countries. But at Tulane, I enjoyed music a lot. I took piano lessons all my 4 years while I was here. I took dance lessons. I enjoy music, and I went to so many different concerts. And I would get my friends together, get the mortarboard together, get whoever I could get together, and go and listen to music anywhere. And we had our annual outings to the symphony for the Easter rendition of Handel's Messiah. I love that. I did that every year, and I've recently started doing D.C. It costs a little more money in D.C. It was $5 to go here in New Orleans. So kind of in the same line in Washington, there's a group of us who do arms control and disarmament issues that are young, sort of. Well, I was young. We had no kids, were married maybe or not, in relationships or not. But there was a group of us. It's a small crowd. You know who everybody is. Everybody knew I was dating my husband when I was dating him. Everybody knew when I was pregnant. And Dave worked at State Department, I worked at Energy, then I worked at State, and he worked at Energy. We switched jobs. So we would get a group together, or I would get a group together occasionally, and we would go take over 3 or 4 rows in a movie theater and watch a movie. And that's just how I enjoyed Washington life. There's plenty of other things to do in Washington, plenty of museums to go to and all that sort of stuff. But to get friends together and go out, that was the big thing I did. I'm also well known for that when I'm on delegations, which is pretty scary. I went to Prague with a group for the Nuclear Suppliers Group meeting. And I like to take advantage of the country that I'm in and go see things. And Prague has the river, and I wanted to go on a tour or a cruise up and down the river. And I had 2 friends, one who was a CIA person and one who was another member of the delegation. And I said, let's go and take this tour up and down the river. And they said, okay. And then I told my boss, because I like my boss, he's a nice guy. I said, I'm going on this tour up and down the river. He's like, oh, that sounds wonderful. Can I come? Okay. And so he asked a couple other people on the delegation. Then I mentioned it to my British friends, including one of the guys who looks like James Bond, so we call him 007, and he comes to the meeting and sets out his briefcase and takes all his gadgets out at every meeting. It's hysterical. He was coming, so of course all the girls wanted to come. So we got the whole British delegation. Then I told my friend, the Scotsman, who's actually Canadian, and I said, we're going, do you want to come? And he said, oh yes. And so he came, and so I had the whole Canadian delegation. Then the Australians had to come, of course, because we never do anything with the Canadians where the Australians don't join us. And then the Netherlands. Of course, my friend Dirk from the Netherlands came along, and he is the Netherlands delegation. There's only one person. So we had 4 countries, all the members of the delegation, except one of the U.S. people who didn't want to come, showed up at the dock, and there's this line stretching off the pier all the way onto St. Charles Bridge in Prague to get on this boat, because I had the idea that I was going to take a cruise with a couple friends. And people will join the crowd when you do stuff like that, is what I found. And in Korea, we generally make a point of going to karaoke, which is what you reminded me of, which is, it's fun to go to karaoke in Korea, but they're always glad to see the end of the night. It's very much like being into New Orleans again. So there's a lot of things you do to relieve the tension, but also when you're working on a delegation, you're a team, and you're in a foreign country, and you're the only 10 people in that foreign country. I have been on the Sound of Music tour in Vienna twice. The Sound of Music tour. Who goes on the Sound of Music tour when they're in Salzburg? But I've done it twice in order to, because you got a weekend in the country, and what are you going to do? You're going to show the country to your friends and colleagues, and so you're going to have a lot of fun. So organization of things is how I have always kind of taking advantage of the opportunities and dragging other people along with me. So that all ended. I had children. Now I'm a stay-at-home. My free time's all with the kids, and I have a little 8-month-old baby at home, and pretty much my free time now is devoted to ABCs, 1, 2, 3s, and bath time, and it's a lot of fun, and that in itself is a major, major part of my life that makes it all worthwhile.
Thank you. Are there any other questions? Yeah.
Hi, I'm Travis Henry, and I'm here at Tulane University as senior. And my question today is going to be directed towards Mr. Bremmer. First of all, I would like to put out there, no one works harder than a Japanese, but that's perhaps because I'm an Asian studies major, so I'm a little biased. But I am curious, if you say that your company is a business, how do you rationalize, I guess, the business aspect of your company and maximizing profits with staying true to your company's focus?
That's a great question. And by the way, the U.S. has actually surpassed Japan in terms of hours on average per week at the workplace as of, I think it was last year or 2 years ago. It did stun me as someone who goes to Japan 2-3 times a year and sees how limited time they spend with their families. for example, and doing everything else. Not to mention their commute times. It's extraordinary, and we've surpassed it. With the amount of land and the amount of people and the amount of wealth in this country, this is my new hobby horse tonight. I'm gonna beat it all day long. You know, I have to say that one of the reasons that I have never thought about selling the company is because there's a big difference between being a publicly held company where you must maximize profit because you have shareholders, and being a privately held company where you make profit, but the choice of whether or not to maximize profit is actually mine, right? And so there's some business I won't do. And if you don't like that and you're a member of my firm, you really have a few options, but they're limited, right? None of them are changing my mind. And I think that that's important. We had a big debate about doing work for a tobacco company. And this was a couple years ago. And it was going to be a fairly large piece of business. It would have been a few $100,000 a year for us back then. It would have been a relatively large client. And the business development, I don't want to say who it is, but for the business development client, salesperson that was involved made an argument that we should do it. And I didn't feel very comfortable because, frankly, from my perspective, it wasn't clear to me that a company that was selling cigarettes was providing a public good. It's my personal view. Other people have different views. But I own the company. And furthermore, if we did this piece of business, I was going to need to be involved personally in advising the CEO of this firm, right? So, and I was losing sleep over this issue because on the one hand, if I turn down the business, I'm kind of hurting this person that sold the business. On the other hand, if I take it, I'm going to have to deal with it. And so I wrote a note to everyone in the firm, and I sent it out, and I explained to them why I didn't want to take the business, but I wanted to hear what they had to say. And we were about 50 people back then. And I got about 15 or 20 responses from different folks in the firm saying whether they thought we should or shouldn't do it. About 60% thought we should, 40% said we shouldn't. But I got another 20 or 30 notes privately, and people coming up to me saying that they were so proud to be part of a firm that we could have a debate like that, and it wasn't just immediately we're going to get the cash. And ultimately, I decided not to do the business. But the point was, different people would have different views on that. I would do business with defense firms and oil companies. Other people would say, don't do that. I would do business with the U.S. government. Other people would say, don't do that. I don't do business with state-owned enterprises in emerging markets that we write about because I think that would create bias in our research. Other people would do that. But the point is, when you can choose what you want to do with your life. And you can choose what kind of company you want to work for. And if you start a company, you can choose what kind of company you want to have. And I don't think we need to sacrifice quality for that. I'll tell you that. Maybe we lost that piece of business. But I bet you that the building of my brand, the ability that I can now stand up and sit down in front of you guys and actually relate this story, maybe that's going to inspire one or two people. Maybe that'll make someone think of eventually applying for a job. I believe that we will get smarter, better people that will stay longer and actually enjoy themselves in the firm and so work harder and not burn out if I have a company that actually truly reflects the nature of what I'm trying to bring as a political scientist and as a human being into the process. And that's the way I've always done it. If I no longer feel that way, then I shouldn't be running the company anymore. It's a great question, something I think about a lot.
Thanks. Anyone else? Yeah.
My name's Alex Thurner. I'm a senior political science student. I have a few questions. I'll start with my most general one. It'd probably be fair to say that you all had fairly successful academic careers. This kind of ties off what was spoke of earlier. If my mark on history would be more Homer Simpson-like than Stephen Hawking-like. So I was wondering if you'd like to elaborate on what you recommend to a student who's very passionate in policy and has kind of found his niche that he wants to follow but wants to develop a career in it, just speaking more generally to everyone. So what do you recommend to the B student and not the child prodigy?
I have a great card that I got, Rude Awakening number 457. It's from the Hallmark. You open it up, it says, no one cares what your GPA was. It's pretty true. I was kind of surprised how very few, after I got into the field, no one cares what my GPA was in college or high school. They care if I know what I'm doing, at least in my career. I don't know if it's the same with you guys. You get judged on how you're doing, how you're contributing to the organization and to your the goals of whatever you're working on at the moment. Not to say that GPA doesn't open doors for you, it does. I just found that it opened doors, and then once I got in there and took advantage of those opportunities, it wasn't an issue anymore.
I would say network. I think that, passion and integrity count for an enormous amount once you're already in an organization, right? I mean, yeah, the A students definitely have a better shot at, the initial interviews and all of that, but once you're actually in some place and you've done it because you've got connections and you know people and someone's helped to introduce you here or there or whatever it is, suddenly, who's solid? So many people nowadays, they're trying something out, they take a job, 2 years later they're doing something else, 2 years later they're doing something else. Employees don't necessarily like that, right? They also aren't necessarily convinced that the folks out there that they're working with all have the highest level of integrity. And I think that someone who is passionate about what they do, that is obviously a team player and is friendly and is a go-to person by other folks because they can be trusted, those people are incredibly valuable in organizations, and they tend to be promoted as fast as you can give them promotions. So I don't know, that strikes me as, it's not always I can think, my firm has a lot of really, really bright people. I can tell you that the brightest people in my organization have not always been the ones that have gotten the promotions most quickly, though they get noticed very quickly when they apply.
I once had someone apply for an internship to work with me who put their SAT score on their resume. I strongly recommend against that. On a serious note, 2 things. Learn how to write well, learn how to speak well. It is astonishing how many people cannot write and speak succinctly and articulately. People with graduate level degrees can't. It still continues to amaze me, though it probably shouldn't. But if you can summarize a complicated issue in 2 pages with bullets and a lot of white space, that is an incredible commodity in Washington. People will be falling over themselves to hire you.
No one's ever looked at my law school transcript ever. I did well. No one's ever looked at it. I can't say that anyone except for the law schools I applied to looked at my undergraduate transcript. That's not to say you shouldn't try hard, because it can only benefit you doing well. But every position I've held or every deal I've been part of, it's the networks I've built, and more importantly, it's the credibility. I had a very similar issue. It was a deal I worked on for the past 10 months. It was in its final stages. And the lead developer, it was a partnership between a few of us, the lead developer changed the scope of the deal. My part was bringing the government relations. We created community development districts, economic development districts. We got tax incentives, tax credits. I mean, it was like a package of government incentives this tall. That was my role. And when the lead developer changed the scope, the type of project it was going to be, to something that would not be acceptable to the government officials who I put my credibility on the line with, I had to step away. And it was a move that was not in my financial interest to do that, but what it did was maintain my credibility. If I had moved ahead with that one deal, even if it had been built, it hasn't been built yet, I would have destroyed my credibility in the Metro New Orleans area, and I could not in good faith go into those politicians ever again and ask them to rely on me or trust what I say. So for me, it's networks and credibility, most important of all, and certainly it can only benefit you doing well in school. So don't strive for mediocrity, but it's certainly not going to be.
Hold on now, Mr. Sherman, Dr. Bremmer. Weren't there choke points in your careers that you would not have gotten past without
law school,
an academic background?
Law school.
So I'm wondering, given the truth of everything you've said, in your careers, maybe you do exemplify what Alex was suggesting, a sort of career path for A students. And maybe there is something a little different, different path for B students, slightly different path for B- students.
Not starting a company. I
Okay.
certainly would say that. I mean, frankly, that's a much more question. I mean, your point that fail. Don't be afraid of failure. You start a company, the vast majority of things you're going to try, you fail at. And you got to have self-confidence. Now, a B student that doesn't have self-confidence and thinks somehow they're inferior or not as capable of as an A student, I would tell that person, don't start a company, because you'll fail again. Right? And then you won't even try a second time. In fact, I don't even need to tell you not to start a company, because you would have never had the confidence to begin it at first. I can't tell you how many times when I started my company, people told me that were B students and were C students and some were A students. And they said, oh, I don't really like my job. It's so cool that you're doing this. I wish I could do something like this. Well, you could, but you're not going to. And the reason you're not going to is the same reason you're in the job you don't like to begin with. And I don't have time to psychologize these people, right? They're people that get paid good money for that. But no, I think my career, look, getting into Stanford, absolutely. Having what was eventually, I guess I was Magna, I wasn't Summa, but I wasn't going to get into Stanford if I didn't have the grades I did or the recommendations I did or all the rest. Having said that, starting a company, zero. Networking, somebody that's speaking well, writing well, having presence. Having charisma really matters. Who's the person, when I give a speech, who's the person I'm going to remember and I'm going to, so actually, if they write me an email that I'm going to follow up on, it's the person that somehow was memorable to me. It's not the person who has an A degree. And out of all, when I went up and got in people's faces and said, I want you to be a client and pay me, Ian Bremmer, Eurasia Group money, you've never heard of me before, but I think you should sign up, your company, Goldman Sachs, AIG, whoever it is. Most of them said no. But the ones that said yes because I got in their face, and I was confident. They said, yeah, maybe this guy actually knows what he's talking about. He probably doesn't, but maybe he does. We'll give him a shot. If I didn't have that confidence, there's no way they were going to do it. It doesn't matter what my GPA was. So I firmly don't believe that my Eurasia Group career track was an A career track. And furthermore, I think about getting into the New York Times for the first time. I think about getting into the national interest or the major journals that I got into for the first time. That was about networking. It wasn't about how good I was. It annoys me how non-meritocratic much of America and much of the world is. That you have this, you write the same piece, it's a great piece, and they tell you, oh no, it goes through review. Oh no, it's too busy. And that turns out you know the editor-in-chief because you met them at a party, and it turns suddenly they take everything you send. Have I just gotten that much better because I really speak well at coffee? No, it's just because it's incestuous. Right? So learn the network. And by the way, don't just do that if you're a B student. Do it if you're an A student. If you're an A student, you think that you're going to get ahead because you're an A student, you're really going to get hurt. The B student in some ways may be better off in business because they already understand that they have to try harder. The A student doesn't necessarily. A student often thinks they have to give you things. It's kind of like coming from cash. Right? You don't want to be in a situation where you're starting a business but you already have all the capital coming from your family. You're not risking anything at all. You got to do it yourself. I'm not saying it, just these are obstacles, and you got to. At the end of the day, you're gonna have to create these networks.
Getting the opportunity when you're an A student might be marginally easier. I think I will give you that. That said, when you have the opportunity, if you haven't done A+ preparation, you're not going to have it again. So if you have 5 minutes to brief the Secretary of Defense before he meets with the King of Jordan or the Prime Minister of Lebanon, and you spend half that time mumbling and you don't actually get the points across, so he then has a pretty awkward 30-minute meeting with this guy, you're not briefing him again. And if you're not briefing him again, you've just lost a whole lot of credibility.
You guys are fortunate to be Tulane students, so if anyone has an interest in New Orleans or Louisiana politics and you walk into a room as a Tulane graduate, that immediately brings with it a certain amount of respect from people who are from this state. How many of you here are from Louisiana? Well, good. Okay, so you know what that means. Georgetown Law has the same thing. It's helped me in my career to be a Georgetown Law graduate. And the network I got at Georgetown Law. And I think the choke point, which everything Dr. Bremmer and everything Maura said is absolutely true. There was a choke point for me in terms of the opportunities that came to me from being part of the Georgetown community, from being part of the Tulane community. I could not have gotten those without the grades to get into Georgetown, but everything else after that is straight networking and business sense.
I've been on hiring panels for positions for the federal government where I have been evaluating the candidates for the positions, and I have not once looked at GPA. I have looked at experience. What the resume looks like, that's pretty much the whole application is resume. All we want to see is BA or BS or MS or MA or PhD. And other than that, it's going to be experience and your recommendations, the people who have vouched for you, for your credibility and for your drive.
Great news for me and my 2.997 GPA. So thanks for weighing in on that. And on a personal note, I actually have had that kind of success with internships and other things I've been pursuing that I've experienced everything you all have been saying. But to segue into another question, you spoke a little bit about credibility, Professor Sherman, and I just kind of wanted you to relay to everyone, or maybe just give your pitch on what you think about getting involved in New Orleans politics, just purely on the basis that some people believe that, it's a defunct system and that maybe like some talented people would want to put their interest in another place where obviously it's very needed here. So if you just kind of like to elaborate on that.
Thank you. There's dysfunction around us. You're right. It is a defunct system. Government is not working as it should in New Orleans. So you have the opportunity, if you want to get involved in New Orleans politics, to carve out your niche and make a difference. The first area where I had a significant involvement was utility regulation, and we had a very challenging year, particularly post-Katrina. But the result was we achieved lower utility rates in New Orleans than anywhere else in the state of Louisiana, and that was a little benefit to the people of New Orleans as they were trying to rebuild. The city council actually just raised them a few weeks ago, but that's besides the point. For a several-year period, and they're now comparable with the rest of the state. But I was really proud of that, because as people were coming home with all these financial obligations, their utility rates for electric and gas were lower than anywhere else in the state. I think New Orleans is a place to be an entrepreneur right now, because there's so much rebuilding to be done. You can pick what part of the rebuilding you want to make your own. And for me right now, it's development. And we have a lot of visions, the folks we work with, and turning those into reality is the challenging part. Lots of folks have vision for what the city could become. But I think New Orleans is an incredible place to take an idea and try to make it into reality. And let me tell you this, the investor community, they're very cautious about New Orleans, but there's a lot of benefits to investing in New Orleans right now, and investors are looking for those benefits, so it's a lot easier to get a good project financed. I think we found the real estate side, when you get a good project, it's easier to get it financed in New Orleans than pretty much anywhere else in the country, particularly over the past couple of years because of the GO zone benefits. But it's a great place where I could never have done what I'm doing anywhere else.
We have time for one or two more questions. Yeah.
Hi, thank you all for coming down. I'm a Tulane senior. I guess my question kind of plays along with his, but it's more of a plea. I came to this panel because I kind of wanted you guys to tell me something that will keep me in poli-sci. I'm this close to going to business school. This close. For the last 6 months, have been polishing my resume, sending out to everywhere. I even sent Mr. Bremmer my resume right here and a cover letter. And I've been trying as hard as I can to find a position in the private sector. I commend all of you in civil servants and in our government, but as a Tulane grad, I unfortunately want to use my knowledge in political science in the private sector, and those areas are very slim. So I've been doing everything I possibly can within my grasp. I'm a good student. I work very hard. I'm networking. I'm doing this. I'm doing that. But it just seems that political science and the whole theme of this panel has been circuitousness, randomness. You're not going to get a job. You basically have to go out there and whatever comes to you. And I came here so that you guys could tell me this is where you should go. This is what you should do. Not be like, well, it kind of just happened this way. I kind of just went here and something happened. And I really had hoped that one of you could be like, okay, political science, it's wonderful. You'll feel renewed vigor for yourself. You'll have, virtuous, stay in political science. But I don't know. It seems like I need a more clear clear career path than just serendipity and randomness.
B school is the reason I have a bad GPA.
All right, I love politics too. Don't get me wrong. That's why I'm a political science major. But as a senior, and I'm looking out to this, economy going into a recession, I'm looking out towards, just a real uneasiness towards my future, and I just want some kind of reaffirmation more so than anything else.
Let me say that I feel your pain. Having gone through that, having gone through the fact that I knew I wanted to be a political scientist and I was having a hard time finding a job. So the first point I would say is if you decide to go to B school, it doesn't mean you're giving up on your political science degree. And you eventually, with an MBA, can still apply what you do with political science and international politics to a bunch of fields, and you'll be doing it with more of a base. A couple of substantive suggestions if you decide you don't want to do that. If you really want to be a political scientist now, I don't want to go to B school. And look, I didn't want to go to B school. It's accounting, finance, mind-numbing, dreary stuff. And for those of you that like B school, God bless you, but it's not what I would be doing. I would say, first of all, vastly more opportunities come from being in a well-connected postgraduate master's program in international affairs. And there are only a few of them, right? Georgetown, Johns Hopkins SAIS, Columbia SIPA, Tufts Fletcher, Harvard Kennedy School. One of those five, those are by far the top five. It's not because they're better programs. It's because they have the internships, they're in the right cities, people come through. You will meet the people that will get you a job. They'll get you in front of the right folks. You finish a 2-year program there, you'll be able to use your political science background far better than you would just as an undergraduate. Because as an undergraduate, you're more of a generalist, okay? Some places you might think about as an undergrad looking for a job where you can apply more poli-sci, there are a few out there. They're going to be entry-level jobs, and they're not going to be as interesting in terms of substance, but you're still going to get some good experience. I'm thinking, for example, of some of the junior entry-level reporters at something like Reuters or even Bloomberg that are covering big international political issues or the confluence of politics and economics and markets. That's an idea. Some of the junior positions at some of the think tanks in Washington, D.C., where you could be a research associate for a more senior person. RAND, Council on Foreign Relations, Carnegie, all the rest. If you have to do it for next to no money or no money if you can get away with that, do it. Find a professor or a senior thinker or a policymaker that for some reason you have a connection to. Either a personal connection or better in some ways, a personal and an intellectual connection. You've done some work and you think what this person is doing is extremely interesting. Political science PhDs are very susceptible to flattery of their intellectual work, right? So if you've actually read some stuff of theirs that probably very few other people have read and you actually know it and you can say something intelligent about it, how you want to help, promote their interests and career, they're more likely to give you more time than they otherwise probably should. That will help you get inside that organization. Something you want to think about, right? No, sucking up to your advisor at a major university is something we all know how to do, but in the job world, it's particularly important. So that's another way you can think of it. Then there are the private sector firms like Oxford Analytica, Stratfor, Economist Intelligence Unit that also have entry-level stuff. I know I'm being very specific and granular here.
That's what I was looking for.
You asked for a plea, and I don't want to speak purely in sort of in generalities. That's my 5-minute sort of piece of advice.
I'm gonna have to go back on YouTube, slow that one down, parse it out, get the names again. But I was looking for more specifics. So
let me add this 20 seconds to it. The question is, do you believe in liberal arts education? Now, I firmly do. Last week, a matter came before me. It's a development I'm working on. The landowner I'm representing the landowner. He's got 4,000 acres. It's the largest undivided tract of land in southeast Louisiana. It's over at Churchill Farms by the TPC golf course. And for years, the development plan has called for spending, before you even get going with development, some about $15 million to build lakes. Well, now the Corps of Engineers needs 150 million cubic yards of clay. And what do you think Churchill Farms has a lot of? Clay. There's no class at Tulane that can teach you how to deal with situations like this. You just need a good understanding of government, because it's working with the federal government, the state government, the local government, and a good foundation so that whatever challenge comes before you, you can tackle it. To me, political science has prepared me to do that, and that's why, for me, it was the perfect major, because I feel like whenever a challenge is presented to me, I have no idea about, you know what, I'm becoming an expert on clay right now. You want to talk about the organic content of clay, the moisture content? Let's talk. Because you know what, come talk to me about a week and a half, I'm going to be the expert on clay. And that's what you have to do in the business world. You identify the topic, become an expert in it, and and political science prepared me for that.
I would translate that into government. I don't know if you would agree, but you get handed the most arcane issues to deal with. How do I negotiate a status of forces agreement with Lebanon? What do I even know about a status of forces agreement? How do I decide what arms to sell to the Jordanian armed forces? Suddenly, you go back to whatever you learned in your classes. You figure out patterns. You know, because you've got this great liberal arts education, where do I start to read? Who do I talk to? Where do I begin? All things that I, obviously, as a poli-sci major, am biased to say that a liberal arts education gets you, but a business education doesn't. I would add to Ian's list working on Capitol Hill. There are a lot of great entry-level jobs there. I think one of the important things for Washington, if you're looking into that kind of world, is to be there. It's much easier when you're actually just someone there who can start a few days after they meet you. And your presence, you're not just one of 400 undergraduates emailing them saying, hey, I'd really like to work for you. And finally, I sympathize so much with this unease that you've echoed, because I've had it since I graduated. I remember when my first job, I was 22, and I was talking to someone who was about 34. I said, gosh, I was going to do domestic politics, and I was going to go to law school and intern for my senators, and now I don't know, foreign policy, what am I doing? What am I going to be when I grow up? He said, you got to realize you don't know what you're going to be when you grow up. You're never going to figure it out. And that was petrifying, but it was also a little comforting. As I said at the beginning, you need to just look at things in sort of these 3-year chunks. Do you love what you're doing for these 3 years? Is this interesting? You're meeting neat people and having fun? Because that's all you can figure out. It's either that or, as Mike outlined, sort of the traditional law school path.
Okay.
My husband works for Raytheon. He's a political science major. He's one of the few political science major that Raytheon has working for them. They tend to hire engineers. So, yeah. But he does not have another degree. He went from political science major to the government to Raytheon. So there's many career paths that will end you in industry if that's where you want to be.
Okay. Thank you.
Okay, and on that positive note, let's end this discussion portion of our roundtable. Before we head outside for some light refreshments and a reception, we have some plaques to make official the recognition of these 4 as distinguished young alumni. So if you would please stand and receive your plaque from Abby, Christine Martin. The plaque says the Tulane University Department of Political Science and Pi Sigma Alpha recognize Ms. Christine Martin as a distinguished young alumnus whose outstanding achievement serves as an inspiration to students of political science. Tulane University Political Science Week. Mr. Sherman. And of course, Maura Carlin and Dr. Ian Bremmer. Thank you all.